I want you to think about the worst day of your life, the day everything fell apart, the day the ground disappeared from under your feet, the day you looked around for the people who were supposed to be there and found nothing, just empty space where love was supposed to be. Now imagine that day coming after you had already survived something that should have killed you. Imagine coming home from the darkest place a human being can go, broken in body, broken in spirit, and knocking on the door of the people who were supposed to love you most. And imagine them opening that door, looking at you, and slowly, quietly closing it again. That was my life. I came home wounded. I came home changed. I came home needing desperately, completely the people I had grown up believing would always be there. They weren't. And I want to tell you what happened next. Because what happened next, on a small farm 60 miles from everything I had ever known, with an old man and his bees and his dirt-covered hands, what happened next gave me back something I thought was gone forever. My name is Alex. I am 32 years old, and this is the story of how I almost didn't make it, and how I did. Let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand what I lost, you need to understand what I had. I grew up in a small town in rural Kentucky, population just under 4,000, the kind of town where the 4th of July parade goes down one main street and everyone shows up, where the high school football team is a religion and the diner on the corner has had the same pie menu since 1979. My family, the Greens, had lived in that town for 3 generations. My grandparents, on my mother's side, had farmed land just outside of town. My father's family ran a hardware store on Main Street that his grandfather had opened in 1952. We were rooted people. That was how we thought of ourselves. Rooted, solid, here. There were 5 of us in our house. My father, Robert, my mother, Patricia, my older brother, Danny, 3 years older than me, my younger sister, Beth, 4 years younger, and me, Emily, the middle child, the one who was always somehow both invisible and essential at the same time. I was not a quiet child. I was loud and curious, and I climbed everything I was told not to climb. I played Little League with the boys and beat most of them. I took apart the family's old radio when I was 9 to see how it worked and managed to put it back together, mostly. My father laughed about that for years. I was the kid who said she was going to join the military when she grew up and meant it. Not because anyone pushed me, nobody in my family had served, but because something in me needed to be tested, needed to know what I was made of. I enlisted at 18. The summer after I graduated high school, while my classmates were heading to college or staying home, I signed my name on the dotted line, and I went. My mother cried. My father shook my hand and then pulled me into a hug. My little sister Beth held onto me at the bus station for a long time. My brother Danny said, "Don't do anything stupid, Em." I said, "I never do." He laughed. I did not know that would be one of the last uncomplicated moments I would have with my family for a very long time. I served for 7 years, 2 deployments, 1 to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq. I am not going to give you the details of what I saw and what I did over there, because those details belong to me and to the people who were beside me. What I will tell you is that I served with everything I had. I gave those years completely my body, my focus, my youth, my sense of safety, my ability to sleep without one ear always open. I was good at it. That sounds strange, maybe saying you were good at war. But I was. I was focused and calm under pressure in a way that surprised even me. I looked out for the people beside me. I came home from my first deployment with a commendation and a new understanding of what I was capable of. I also came home changed. The first time. That is the thing nobody prepares you for, the way you come back different, and nobody at home has changed at all. My mother still made the same Sunday pot roast. My father still watched the same football team. Beth had a boyfriend now. Danny had gotten married. Life had continued in that small Kentucky town at exactly the same pace, and I stood in my childhood kitchen and felt like a stranger. I didn't say anything about it. I smiled and ate pot roast and asked about Beth's boyfriend and Danny's wife. I tucked the strangeness away somewhere deep, and I went back for my second deployment. That was where everything changed. It was during my second deployment, I was 25 years old, that I was injured. I am not going to describe the details because they are mine to hold. What I will tell you is that it was serious, that I spent 3 weeks in a military hospital before I was stable enough to be transferred, that I was medically discharged 8 months later, and that when I looked down at my body in that hospital bed, at what had changed, at what would never be the same, I made myself a promise. I said, "You survived this. Now go home. Go home and let the people who love you help you heal." I believed that promise was possible. I did not yet know what was waiting for me. I came home in March. Cold, gray Kentucky. March, with the last of the winter still in the air. My father picked me up from the airport alone. My mother had said she wasn't feeling well. Danny had work. Beth had school. Just my father, standing at arrivals with his hands in his jacket pockets. He hugged me. He said, "Good to have you back, Em." He looked at me, at the way I was moving, at what was different, and something crossed his face. Not pain, not grief, something more like discomfort. Like he had been shown something he didn't know how to process and had decided not to try. We drove home mostly in silence. My mother had made dinner. She hugged me at the door quickly, briefly, and then went back to the kitchen. She was busy. She was always busy. Danny and his wife Karen came over that first weekend. Karen smiled very carefully the entire evening in the way people smile when they are trying not to look at something. Danny talked about his job, his house, a fishing trip he was planning. He asked me almost nothing about where I had been or what had happened. Beth was the warmest. She sat next to me at dinner and talked to me like a normal person, asked real questions, held my hand once when she thought nobody was watching. But even Beth, after a few weeks, got quieter, more careful, more absent. What was happening, and I could feel it happening even if I couldn't fully name it yet, was that my family did not know how to be around me anymore. The injury, the changes, the weight I carried, it made them uncomfortable, and their response to that discomfort was to slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly withdraw. My father started working longer hours. My mother found reasons to be elsewhere. Danny called once a week and then once every 2 weeks, and then when I called him, he let it go to voicemail. There was no single moment of rejection. That would have been almost easier. Instead, it was 1,000 small withdrawals, 1,000 quiet closed doors, 1,000 moments of choosing comfort over showing up. By May, 2 months after I came home, I was living in my childhood bedroom in my parents' house, and I had never felt more alone in my life. And then came the conversation that broke everything open. It was a Sunday evening, June. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, and I came in to refill my water glass, and something about the way they went quiet when I walked in. That specific silence, that means a conversation has just been interrupted, made me stop. I said, "What's going on?" My mother looked at my father. My father looked at his hands. And then my mother said, quietly, carefully, like she had been practicing, "Alex, we've been talking, and we think it might be better for everyone if you found your own place. You need your independence. We need our space. It would be good for you." I stood at the kitchen counter with my water glass in my hand. I said, "You need your space." My father said, "It's not like that, Em. It's just this is a lot for all of us. The adjustment we're not equipped to." He stopped. He actually stopped mid-sentence and looked away. "We're not equipped." I put my water glass down very carefully on the counter. I walked back to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought with a clarity that was almost peaceful in how complete it was. There is nobody coming. There is no cavalry. The people I came home for have decided that I am too much, that I am inconvenient, that the version of me that needs help is not the version they signed up for. I had survived things that would have destroyed most people. I had held myself together through things I cannot describe. I had made myself a promise in a hospital bed and traveled across the world to keep it. And I was sitting on the edge of a childhood bed in a house where I was no longer wanted. I will not tell you what the following weeks were like in detail. What I will say is that they were the darkest of my life, darker than anything I experienced overseas, because overseas I had a mission and I had people beside me. In that bedroom, I had nothing. I was at my absolute lowest point when I got the phone call that changed everything. The call came from my Aunt Ruth, my father's older sister, a woman I had not spoken to in almost 4 years. She had heard through the family grapevine that I was home and struggling. She did not ask for details. She did not express sympathy in that careful, distant way I had become so accustomed to. She said, "Alex, I want you to come stay with Harold." Harold was her father-in-law, my uncle's father. I had met him exactly twice, once at a family wedding when I was 12, once at a funeral when I was 19, an old man, a farmer. He lived alone on a property about 60 miles outside of town since his wife had passed 5 years earlier. I said, "Aunt Ruth, I don't even know him." She said, "I know, but he knows enough, and he has space and quiet, and he asked me to ask you." I said, "He asked for me specifically?" She said, "He said tell that girl to come to the farm. Tell her the bees need looking after, and I could use the company." I sat with that for a moment. A man I barely knew. A farm 60 miles away. Bees. I said, yes. I did not have a better option. But even if I had something about those words, tell that girl to come to the farm, something about the simplicity of being asked, of someone making space for me without conditions, without discomfort, without the careful smiles and the quiet withdrawals. I packed 2 bags. I told my parents I was leaving. My mother said, "I think that's a good idea." My father walked me to my car and stood there while I loaded my bags, and he said, "Alex," and then stopped. He never finished the sentence. I drove away without looking in the rearview mirror, and 60 miles later, I turned down a gravel driveway lined with old oak trees, and a 79-year-old man in overalls and muddy boots was standing on the porch waiting for me. His name was Harold Beaumont, and he had no idea, and I had no idea, that he was about to save my life. Harold Beaumont was not a man of many words. That was the first thing I understood about him. He showed me to my room, small, clean, a window that looked out over a field, and he said, "Supper's at 6. Don't be late." And that was the welcome. No questions about what happened to me. No careful looks, no sympathy that felt more like pity. He treated me the way you treat a person like my presence was ordinary and expected and fine. I cannot tell you how much I needed that. The farm was about 40 acres. Harold grew vegetables mostly for himself and the local farmers market and kept bees. 8 hives lined up at the edge of a meadow where wildflowers grew in a way that looked accidental, but I later learned Harold had planted deliberately over 20 years. The first morning I woke up at 5 from old military habit, body clock that reset years ago and never went back. I lay in the dark for a moment listening, and what I heard was nothing, not silence exactly. Birds, wind in the oak trees, the distant sound of Harold moving around in the kitchen below. I went downstairs. Harold was at the stove making coffee. Real coffee? Percolator, the old-fashioned kind. He handed me a cup without turning around, like he had known I was coming. I sat at the kitchen table. He sat across from me. We drank our coffee in silence for 20 minutes, and it was the most comfortable I had felt in months. After breakfast, he said, "You can help with the garden today if you want, or don't, either way." I went to the garden. I had not worked with my hands, really worked, physically, outdoors since before my deployment. I knelt in the dirt next to Harold and I pulled weeds and turned soil, and by the end of 2 hours, my arms ached and my knees were dirty, and I was sweating in the early morning Kentucky sun. And somewhere in those 2 hours, something in my chest, something that had been locked tight since the hospital, since the bedroom, since the kitchen table conversation, loosened, just slightly, just enough to let air in. I did not cry. I just breathed. Harold noticed. He did not say anything. He just handed me a bottle of water and went back to his weeding. That was how he was. He noticed everything and commented on almost nothing. It was the most respectful form of attention I had ever received. He introduced me to the bees on my 3rd day. He suited me up the full white protective suit, the veil, the gloves, and walked me out to the hives in the early morning when the bees were calmer. He moved slowly and deliberately, every movement purposeful and unhurried. He said, "The first thing you learn about bees is that they know when you're afraid. Fear puts something in the air chemicals. Your body releases them, and the bees feel it. So you cannot be afraid. You have to be calm. You have to mean calm, not just pretend it." I said, "What if you can't be calm?" He said, "Then you wait. You stand at the edge of the field, and you breathe until you are. The bees will still be here." He opened the first hive. The sound, that deep, layered hum, I felt it in my chest before I heard it with my ears. Thousands of small lives, organized and purposeful and ancient in a way that made everything human feel very recent. Harold reached in, bare-handed. He had long since stopped wearing gloves for his own hives and lifted out a frame covered in bees. He held it toward me. The bees moved across his hands without stinging. He was so completely still, so completely unafraid. He said, "You see the queen? There, that longer one, moving through the cluster." I looked, and I found her, this slightly longer, slightly more deliberate bee at the center of everything. Something about finding her, about having something specific to look for, and finding it felt significant in a way I couldn't explain. Over the following weeks, I learned the bees. I learned their rhythms and their moods, and the way the hive changed with the weather and the season. I learned to move slowly and mean calm. I learned that Harold was right. They absolutely knew the difference. And in learning the bees, I learned something about myself. I learned that I was still capable of focus, of patience, of being fully present in a moment without my brain pulling me somewhere dark. Harold did not talk about himself easily, but over weeks, over coffee in the early mornings, over suppers, over long, quiet evenings on the porch, pieces of him came through. He had served, too. Korea. He was 19 years old in 1953. He told me one evening like he was stating a weather report. He came home to a country that did not particularly want to talk about Korea. He came home to a family that was glad he was alive and had no framework for who he had become. He said, "My father shook my hand at the bus station. My mother made a pie." And then life just continued, like I had been away at college. I said, "What did you do?" He said, "I bought this land. I planted things. I got the bees." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Things that grow don't ask questions. They just need showing up for." I sat with that for a long time. He told me about his wife, Eleanor, 51 years of marriage. He said she was the one who understood him, not because she always knew what to say, but because she knew when not to say anything. He said she used to come out to the bee meadow and just sit, not helping, not talking, just present. He said, "That's all most people need, really, someone to just sit." His eyes went somewhere far away when he talked about Eleanor. Not sad, exactly more like he was visiting somewhere he loved and knew he could not stay long. I told him about my family one evening. Not the whole story. I didn't have words for the whole story yet. Just the outline. The coming home, the careful smiles, the kitchen table conversation. He listened without moving. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said simply and without drama, "People are afraid of what they cannot fix. Your family is afraid of you because they cannot fix what happened. That is their failure, Alex, not yours. 8 words. That is their failure, Alex, not yours. I had been waiting without knowing I was waiting to hear someone say exactly that. The turning point did not come in one dramatic moment. It came in pieces over 3 months, small things that accumulated into something large. It came the morning I woke up and realized I had slept through the night completely, without waking for the first time since before my second deployment. It came the afternoon I was working in the garden alone, and I started humming. Not intentionally, just this absent, unconscious humming while I worked, and I stopped and listened to myself for a moment and thought, when did that come back? It came the day Harold handed me the farmer's market accounts, the pricing, the records, the customer relationships, and said, "You're better with numbers than I am. Take it over." Not asked. Told, like it was obvious, like he had no doubt I was capable. I had not been trusted with responsibility since my discharge. The simple act of being handed something and expected to handle it, I had not realized how much I needed that until it happened. It came in the letters. I started writing. Not to anyone at first, just a journal. Harold's suggestion after I mentioned one evening that I couldn't get certain things out of my head. He said, write them down. Give them a place to live outside of you. Very Harold practical, no ceremony. I started writing and I could not stop. Pages and pages. The deployment, the hospital, the bedroom, the kitchen table, all of it going from inside me onto paper where I could look at it from the outside. My therapist, I had started driving into town once a week to see a Veterans Affairs counselor named Dr. Reeves. She said writing was one of the most powerful processing tools available. Harold had figured that out without any degree, and it came with the bees. One morning, I went to the hives alone for the first time. Harold watched from the porch. I could feel him there, but he did not come with me. I suited up. I walked to the hives. I stood at the edge for a moment, and I breathed until I was calm. Genuinely calm, not performing it. I opened the first hive. The hum rose up around me, thousands of small deliberate lives going about their ancient work. I found the queen. I checked the frames. I did everything Harold had taught me. And standing there in that bee meadow, in the Kentucky summer morning with the wildflowers Harold had planted over 20 years, and the bees moving around my hands, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed. I felt like myself. Not the self before the deployment. I was not going back to her, and I was learning that was okay. But a self, a present, capable, worthy of space self. I stood there for a long time after I closed the hive. Harold was still on the porch when I walked back. He was drinking his coffee and looking at the field, and he did not say anything when I sat down beside him. He just handed me a cup, and I sat there in the Kentucky morning sun, and I drank it. I stayed at Harold's farm for 8 months in total. In that time, I learned to keep bees, grow vegetables, preserve food for winter, repair a fence, identify 37 different wildflowers by name, make cornbread from scratch, and sit in silence without it feeling like loneliness. I also slowly, with Dr. Reeves and with Harold's quiet, steady presence, began to process what I had carried home from overseas. Not resolve it, not fix it, process it, learn to carry it differently, learn that it was part of me without being all of me. My family reached out a few times during those months. My mother called twice. My father sent a card, like I was a distant acquaintance that said he hoped I was doing well. Danny left a voicemail that I listened to 3 times and did not return. Beth came to visit once she drove out to the farm on a Saturday, and we sat on the porch and talked for 4 hours. She cried. I held her hand. I am still figuring out my relationship with my family. I will not tie that into a neat bow because it is not neat. Some wounds take longer than others. Some trust, once broken, rebuilds slowly and imperfectly or not at all. What I know is that Harold Beaumont, this 79-year-old Korean War veteran with dirt on his hands and bees in his meadow and coffee on the stove at 5 in the morning, gave me something my own family could not. He gave me the experience of being exactly who I was, wounded and changed and difficult and capable and worthy and being wanted anyway. He never once made me feel like I was too much. He never once looked away. He handed me responsibility and coffee and silence and bees and cornbread and the simple daily dignity of being treated like a person who could handle things. He saved my life, not dramatically, not with speeches or grand gestures, with a porch and a cup of coffee and bees that needed looking after. He saved my life, not dramatically, not with speeches or grand gestures, with a porch and a cup of coffee and bees that needed looking after. I told him that once that he had saved my life. We were on the porch, evening, the fireflies just starting in the meadow. I said it simply because it was simply true. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You saved your own life, Alex. I just gave you somewhere to do it." I think about that every single day.